Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome 49ers legend, Randy Cross. Man, how's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm doing real good. I mean, it's the middle of a hell of a football season, all the way around college and NFL. So it's kind of hard not to be enjoying 2022 right now.
Sure it is, man. Like the 2022 is a different type of vibe. Man, it's just different kind of weird season.
Yeah. I mean, for a lot of teams, no more obviously than the Indianapolis Colts. You know, everybody's not everybody, but I know a lot of people that thought they were a Super Bowl type team, and this 3-5-1 start it's been just bizarro world that Jonathan Taylor's not, helping everybody's fantasy team, and Matt Ryan's on the bench, and they hired Jeff Saturday. It just keeps getting more bent and more bent.
Yeah. They just hired him when he only has high school coaching experience from what I'm looking at.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, he's an interim coach. Hey, it's one of the things, if you've got a toy that's worth a few $1 billion, and, there's a name owner after your name, you get to do what you want, despite what, all the posers and analysts and all the other knuckle brains on TV and radio, whatever their opinion is, fine. But the only one that matters is Irsay's. And if that's what he wants to do, it's what he wants to do. It's his team.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Speaking of the 49ers, man, this is just like a weird situation when you look at it. This is a team that's kind of has the aspirations to be Super Bowl contenders, but they're starting off 4-4. So what's your thoughts of it?
I think if you were going to be realistic, they're probably about where they were going to be anyway. If Trey Lance was at quarterback or Jimmy Garoppolo was at quarterback, you put the number of people they've had out with injuries, and in their special years, the last few, if you go back since their last Super Bowl, or maybe the Super Bowl in New Orleans, and just kind of go through those years, when they're good, they don't get a whole lot of injuries. And when they have struggles, that's when they get guys banged up. And, not having Williams hurt that offense pretty bad. Not having a few of their other guys hurt the offense pretty bad, and the defense. Bosa being out. And so everybody's got those kind of statements. It's just, unlike what they'll tell you in Philadelphia and up on the Upper East Coast, there's nobody that's really just blatantly dominant. Yeah, sure, Philly's undefeated, but they're doing it in an interesting way. And the Giants and Jets are looking good, but yeah, we'll see when it starts getting at the end. There's a lot of teams that are in the Niners positions right now that have got a pretty good shot at being there at the end.
Yeah, NFC is pretty wide open. Like, it's a mystery, even though the Eagles have started out pretty well. That's like, at some point, a team's going to beat them. But who's it going to be? That's the question. Is it going to be the Cowboys a second time with Dak Prescott? Or is it a mystery team that we have no idea who's going to beat them?
Yeah. I mean, to me, all that stuff about undefeated and whatnot is kind of like, that's sports talk radio crap. And it eats up a lot of time and starts a lot of conversations and all that. Only one team's ever done that, and I'm not sure if anyone will ever duplicate that. There have been teams that have been 8-1, 18-1. We were the first one. The Bears in '85 were the second one. There's been others, but there's only one way to go 18-1 the right way, and we've seen 18-1 the wrong way, where you go 18-0 and then lose the Super Bowl. So, take a deep breath, keep it all in perspective, and know that, if you're that good, concentrate on winning the last one, not all of them.
Yeah. It's not how you start, it's how you finish is what they would say in that motto. Mm-hmm. But speaking of yourself, like, what got you into playing football at that point of your career?
Well, for me, it was all happenstance, really. I had a rather spotty academic and, let's say, social record back when I was a little kid, like, 7th, 8th, early 9th grade. And my dad decided that I needed to have a little more discipline and structure in my life. So he decided to put me in an all boys Catholic school, high school. So I took an entrance exam, which I thought I had sandbagged and messed up. And much to my surprise, I did pretty well. And I didn't know anybody at the school. I mean, I knew zero. Maybe one or two guys, because I was an altar boy. I went to public school, but I was one of the few public school altar boys. So maybe a guy or two I might have done that with, looking back on it. But I didn't know anybody at this school. It was called Crespi Carmelite High School, and it's in Encino, California, in the San Fernando Valley. And my dad said, "You're going, and if you want to meet guys, go out for football. It's before school starts. You'll get a chance to play football. And who knows, you might even like it." I was a baseball guy, so I had to do something until baseball season started. So, yeah, I went out for football. And I was initially supposed to be a quarterback. At least I thought I was a quarterback. And it took about a week of practice for that to not be true. Because I was in ninth grade, beginning of ninth grade, I was like 5'7", 5'8", and I weighed about 180 pounds. So I was a pretty much little fat kid. And, I stretched out. By the end of the ninth grade, I was 6'1" and 185. So that worked out well. But no, I had no plans on playing football. Just like, I played in high school, did very well, got scholarships to a lot of great schools. My Final Four were Nebraska, who had just won the national title, Alabama, Texas, and UCLA. And I ended up going to UCLA. Terry Donahue recruited me there, and I decided that I was going to, take the challenge of trying to establish something special. So I did that, and I played at UCLA for 4 years. And even when I was getting told about playing in the NFL, I hadn't thought that was a career. I mean, I had never even thought about it. So it was a lot different atmosphere back then. Not everyone was – the money was completely different. When I first got in the NFL, guys they had off-season jobs because what they made playing football wasn't something that you could just sort of live off all year long. So, yeah, it was an interesting time getting into football, but it provided me with a hell of a life.
Yeah, in those days, the cost of what they had then, yeah, you had to do a second job because that was like a different type of pay then. And you were playing like college football during the 70s, and then you were like, sometimes when you find your purpose and you find what's good for your career, you're just going to go with it. You just got to roll with it. Here's a good question by a buddy of mine, Stephen Rose. Ask him if he enjoyed attending UCLA.
Oh, I loved it. I never understand and will never understand why they're not one of the top recruiting schools in the country. And, people say, oh, yeah, well, UCLA, it's in LA. No, it's not in LA. It's in Westwood, which is right next to Bel Air, which is right next to Beverly Hills. It is about as sweet an area as you could possibly think of. It's a great school. It's a wonderful campus. They should be year in and year out, contending. So, and that isn't how it's always worked out. But needless to say, I'm a big fan. So I really enjoyed going to UCLA. It was one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah, it's one of those top schools when it comes to college basketball and all the other stuff. You can't go wrong with that program. Like when you were speaking of Terry Donahue, I believe he was the GM for the Niners for that short stint, right?
Yeah, he was my offensive line coach for all 4 years at UCLA. And he's the first guy that ever recruited me when I was in high school. Probably it was after my sophomore year in high school. We're getting ready for spring, and he was coaching at Kansas and hadn't quite yet changed over. He went with Pepper Rogers to UCLA. So, yeah, he was the first guy I met and had a huge influence in my life, and had his period with the Niners. It didn't work out fantastic, but he's not the Lone Ranger in that.
Yeah, rest in peace to him. I guess he impacted a lot of players like yourself, and he was your O-line coach. But speaking of offensive linemen, like, what's your thoughts of Trent Williams, man?
Well, let's see. If you like him big, fast, aggressive, dominant, and with a nice, nasty streak, what's not to like? I think he's really, really good. When he's healthy, the line as to who's the best lineman in the league starts behind him, and it's not necessarily right behind him. he's to me, when he's on his game, he's clearly still the best O lineman in the league.
Without a doubt, very athletic and does a lot of stuff that most other linemen wouldn't do. Like they were even trying to move him a little bit at fullback at times, like doing his little plays. That's rare.
Oh yeah, no, it is. It's fun to watch too.
Yeah, it is. Oh, since we're going with the UCLA topic, what players on your team that you enjoy playing with? Like, which one of the players?
I had a lot of good buddies. My best friend from high school, and through my UCLA years was my roommate. Keith Eck was an offensive lineman. We had several offensive linemen. Phil McKinley, who today you see him as a side judge in the NFL as an official. And he's very hard to miss because Phil's about a 6'6", 260-pound, just yoked up, great-looking official. He was a really, really good offensive guard at UCLA. Several of those guys. Cliff Frazier was our nose tackle. He played for the Eagles. Manu Tuiasosopo was a defensive tackle. He played for the Seahawks and the Niners. Guys, it's a long list. John Shara was our quarterback. He was a safety and a kick returner for the Eagles. Wally Henry, also an Eagle. Jerry Robinson was a freshman when I was a senior, and his freshman year he was a wide receiver, and then Terry Donahue moved him to linebacker, and he was a 3-time consensus All-American. Up until that point, he was the first one to ever do that. So I don't know. It's a long list. We had an impressive group during my period at UCLA. A lot of guys that ended up playing in the league.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting to have a lot of those players on your program that succeeded, and they've done pretty well. Like you just said, Sopiolo, whatever his name is, from the Seahawks, he did come out as your Super Bowl winning team at 84, right?
Right. Yeah, Manu Tuiasosopo.
Yeah, I can't even pronounce it right. It's just like hard to say. Just like Hufanga, sometimes people can't even say it right.
Yeah. Well, it's like everybody calls him Tua. You got traded to the Dolphins, and it was like Tua traded. Say, you can't say Tango Valor.
It's hard to say. So here's another good question. Like, since we're going by your success in the Super Bowl, like, which one of the Super Bowl wins did you enjoy the most as a player?
I'm not going to cop out, but I give the same answer all the time. It's kind of like picking your favorite kid. I've got 3 of those too, but the best team I ever played on was the '84 team that beat Miami in January of '85 in Super Bowl 19. The first Super Bowl's just an amazing experience, and my last game and moments as a player were in Super Bowl 23 in that win. So each one of them's got a pretty special sort of designation to me. So I prefer to say the best team I played on was the '84 team.
Okay, that's nothing wrong with that, and you beat one of the best quarterbacks of that era, Dan Marino. So that's a good one.
Yeah. It happens all the time now. It's kind of like that Georgia-Tennessee game last Saturday. In that Super Bowl, all they talked about was Dan Marino and the Dolphins.
Yeah,
and our offense showed up and carved their butts up. And Georgia did the same thing to Tennessee on Saturday, and with their quarterback Stetson Bennett. So sometimes history repeats itself.
Sometimes getting disrespected and being called the underdog has a blue chip on your shoulder, and a team like Miami was putting up spectacular numbers.
Yeah, but they'd forgotten, the so-called experts had forgotten something very important, and that's guys like Ronnie Lott and Jack Reynolds and Fred Dean and Gary Johnson and Louis Kelcher, Manu Tuiasosopo and Keena Turner and Eric Wright. I mean, we had our defense was a beast. And everybody talked about our offense, and rightfully so. We've got several, Hall of Fame players. But, man, our defense, they were a bitch. There's nobody that wanted to play RD. Nobody. Nobody in their right mind.
Oh, yeah, because you guys had a very good, talented defense. But speaking of a guy, I don't think there's ever going to be a player of Ronnie Lott's caliber. Name a player who would amputate a tip of his pinky. I can't even think of anybody else.
Yeah, not too many. Not too many to do
Not
something
too many,
like
man.
that. No, and Ronnie was, besides it being a great teammate and a great guy, just an incredible player. And when you're that versatile, he was an All-Pro and a Pro Bowler at corner and at safety. So everyone talks all the time. Oh, what a great safety he was. Well, look up his stats for his first 3 or 4 or 5 years when he was a corner, and how many interceptions he had and how many touchdowns he scored off those interceptions and everything else. He was really, really special.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what he was. He was a very versatile player because you had safeties at that spot. Dwight Hicks was a guy I met like in 2016. He was a good player for that time being. That guy was a ball hawker also. So he seemed like a really nice dude.
No, good man. Really good man. And a great player, and decided to move to Hollywood and go into acting.
Yeah.
He did pretty well.
Seems about it. But what was it like did you play for Dick Nolan before you played for Bill Walsh?
No. I was actually, when I retired in January of '89, I was the last pre-Eddie DeBartolo Niner. I started in '76. The Morabito brothers still owned the team back then, and they had just hired Monty Clark, who was the O-line coach for the Miami Dolphins undefeated team. And so Dick Nolan was a year or so. I missed him by like a year. His last year coaching the Niners was 75, and my first year with the Niners was 76.
Okay, so that was the other guy you guys got. So it was Monty Clark. Okay, interesting. I thought it was Dick Nolan because I thought he had some good success track record. And then
no, well, actually, Bill Walsh came in '79, so I got there in '76. We had Monty Clark in '76. We had Ken Meyer in '77. We had Pete McCulley and Fred O'Connor in '78. So Bill in '79, which is my 4th year, he was my 5th head coach.
Damn, that had to be a lot of change of the coaching staff. Like, it had to be tough, right?
And people act like, changing coaches and itchy trigger fingers, something that just happened. Nah, not really.
Well, changing head coaches in that time span of your time was like changing your underwears, man. Like, it was bad that day.
Yeah. And part of it's money again. I mean, my rookie year, I made $27.5. I was the 2nd round pick. I was their first pick because they had sent their 1st round pick to New England for Jim Plunkett. So,
yeah, Plunkett was
different world.
Yeah,
Plunkett was good. He just had the misfortune of being behind our offensive line, who wasn't very good at this time. So he got the devil beat out of him. And the reason he needed to go to the Raiders and kind of recover for a year or so, Al Davis, smartest thing he ever did was basically when the Niners cut Plunkett, he picked him up. And he said, look, you're just going to rest and rehab and, you'll be good. All he did was win a couple Super Bowls for him.
Yeah, I mean, he just wasn't given quite the fair chance. He was on a bad team with the Patriots, and then the Niners, let's be fair, during the 70s, it was kind of like a terrible team to go with the offensive line.
Hey, at New England, they ran the option in the NFL, and that was the bad old nasty NFL too, where defenses could do a lot of different things that they'd put you in jail for now. But, yeah, somebody had the ingenious idea they were going to run a passing quarterback as the option player. That didn't work out good for Jim physically. Got him a lot of scars.
Yeah, it sure did. Speaking of you as playing, like, what team did you hate it playing against in the NFL, just as an opponent? Like, you can't stand them?
There was no team that I just flat out couldn't stand. I love beating the Rams because I grew up in LA, so that was fun. Probably of all the teams we played it was the most enjoyable to beat, probably be Dallas because they thought they were so good. And they've never really gotten over that. And, they were really convinced with all that America's team BS that it was real. So it was always fun to beat Dallas, no matter what year it was, because that and the fact that early on in my career, when we weren't very good, they beat the snot out of us. I mean, bad. So being able to return the favor was always fun.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Dallas at the time was like everybody was just hyping them as the America's team and all that other stuff. And then I think I've seen a couple of the narratives of what you guys were saying when you guys beat the crap out of the Cowboys. You guys were smiling, happy, and say, hey, I'm glad we beat the crap out of them.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, especially all that. But a lot of stuff have changed since you guys have stopped playing the game. Like Pro Bowl has not been as interesting. So do you really think that it's kind of gotten softer and they're not really interesting fans as like they used to?
I mean, have you seen it? Yeah,
it seems like football.
It's not quite football. And yeah, I think they should do something. They're talking about a skills challenge. So yeah, we'll see how that works out. I mean, Pro Bowl's always been a popularity contest. And it's, unlike whether it's all pro or all conference or all some of these other things, the players have a pretty good, heavily weighted vote in the Pro Bowl. And the Pro Bowl is a game you always wanted to play in. And yeah, it used to be actually where you had to actually play football. Now it's really not the case. I did a Pro Bowl on the radio, I want to say about 2016, 2017. And it really shocked me how much standing around there was in that game and just kind of standing and watching. It was 7-on-7 where they let fat guys actually suit up.
Man, like it's changed over the years. Like, it's like, okay, you've been voted 3 times to go to the Pro Bowl from what I'm looking at. But, this is a good question from this Rams fan. Ask Randy Cross what he thinks of the Yorks compared to the Eddie DeBartolo Jr. Do you think there's a difference or you think it's a little drop off? It's more realistic if you want to put it out there.
Well, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's history and records are what they are. I think they're trying their ass off. They've gotten to 2 Super Bowls. They haven't gotten the results they wanted. And hopefully they'll get back to another one and get a chance to add their first and the 6th for the franchise. But, it's actually not really much of a fair comparison, realistically looking at it. But, you can't accuse that family of not trying. They have battled their butts off trying to make that team a winning team. That when you're doing the best you can, you're doing the best you can. But I think they've got this thing figured out. The smartest thing I think they did was hire Kyle and John Lynch at the same time and give them matching contracts, and they gave them matching extensions. And it just takes one huge part of your worry away when those guys are synced up like that and they get along and they know what they're doing. And that helps ownership an awful lot. The omnipotent days of ownership, I'm not sure if it's ever been, quite what it was knocked up to be, but guys that Jerry Jones, his results are also his results. Since Jimmy left, how many Super Bowls has Jerry left? Jerry won
0.
Oh, you got the one with Barry.
Oh yeah, Barry Switzer. Yeah, I forgot.
Yeah. But I mean, the team hasn't been since the mid '90s, since they've been really a dominant team, and it's just it's kind of sad, to be honest with you, and not real hard to figure out.
Yeah, no championship appearances, none of that. It's just sad to go through that if you're a Cowboys fan. But oh, here's this one question that I must have forgot. So 1976, your pick was 42 pick. What was it like sitting in the room waiting to be called? Was there other teams wanting to pick you? Did you expect to go 42?
No, no. I mean, I was told I was going to be a first or second rounder. I was called in the first round by the Cleveland Browns, who wanted to pick me in the first round. I was kind of a knucklehead, didn't give them the answers they really wanted about how excited I was to go to Cleveland. You know, I was a 21-year-old Southern California guy that, you know, was allergic to snow. That wasn't the answer they wanted. So they ended up drafting a fullback from Purdue.
So it had to do
Yeah.
with the weather-wise. Like, I'm not going to play in the cold.
Yeah. Hey, can you pause real quick?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, guys, he'll be right back. I'll keep more questions up to you guys, but he'll be right back for you.
Sorry about that. I'm in a hotel in New York, so when they call, you gotta go.
That's okay. It's all good, man. I gave you a little weight right there, man. It's all good. Trying to cover as much questions as I can, but there's some good questions out of it. Since you said you hated the Cowboys more than the Rams, which player that you couldn't stand against? Like he just gave you some problems.
Playing against, there's always a style. You know, I don't know how much you like boxing and MMA and that kind of stuff, but styles make fights and styles make matchups. So it's not always the top of the mind all pro guys that, you know, were the biggest issues. There was a guy from Notre Dame who played for the LA Rams, took over the position from Merlin Olsen, a guy named Mike Fanning. He played at Notre Dame, and he was at the Rams for about 10 years. Really good player, real long player, about 6'5", 6'6". I always thought he was really good, a lot better than people gave him credit. So he'd on occasion give me a bad time. But the two guys I probably would say I had one bad game against each guy. Joe Klecko of the Jets and Steve McMichael of the Chicago Bears. Just because they were kind of built like me. They were the same kind of strength like me. There were a lot of similarities. So it was that was always a good matchup for me.
Yeah, those are good ones right there. Steve McMichael's a really good commodity for the Bears, and then you talked about certain other players like that. Like, wasn't there like ever a good matchup with you and Randy White or no?
Randy was on the other defensive tackle.
Oh, he was?
He was over John Ayers. So between Randy White and Lawrence Taylor, I always missed out getting to see a steady diet of them. But we had a guy at left guard by the name of John Ayers who was a nightmare for those guys. I mean, he was like an eraser. He always had good games when we played the Cowboys and the Giants. Always,
man. Well, here's an interesting one right here. Kevin Greene. Have you ever had any matchups with him or not really?
Oh yeah, no. He was Kevin was the defensive end. When I first got to the Niners, the defensive end on that side for the Rams was Jack Youngblood.
Oh yeah.
And then after Blood left, that's when Kevin Greene started being the guy coming on the outside on that side for the Rams. So yeah, I was very familiar with Kevin. He was, later on he'd be a Niner, then he'd be a Steeler and whatnot. He was He was really, really good. Very, very strong. One of the early kind of effort technique guys that could do a lot of different things.
Oh yeah, it's just a lot different with these type of players how you play against. And oh, here's a really good one I like, man. What do you think of the college system of the playoffs? Like the way they're added into it, like.
I'm not a big fan of the expansion to 12. Just I don't think there are that many teams worthy of the process of will it mean you'll identify a true champion? You're not necessarily going to identify the best team. And I think the way it currently is with 4, you're almost guaranteed for that to happen. I would just challenge people, say, hey, look back at the last decade, last 10 years, or maybe let's just say since the playoffs started. Who were the number 12 team? Who was the number 12 team in the country? Can you make an argument that they should have had a chance to win a national championship? Or the number 10 or the number 11? So I don't like it. I'm realistic. I know why it's going to change. I know why it's going to be done. It's about money. It's about a couple extra games. That means TV pays more. That means everybody makes more money. Well, everybody except the players. But yeah, let's just say I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, too many games extended and all that stuff. I can understand that, but
oh yeah, that and you're going to have college kids playing 18 games, 17 games.
Risk of injuries too, so that can be the only problem right there.
Oh yeah, well the pros play that many, but hell, they're getting paid a lot. College kids aren't getting paid squat. Don't believe all these NIL stories. Do not believe it. Are there people making money? Yes. The vast majority aren't making stink.
Yeah, college players don't make as much money, but when it comes to the pros, like you said, when they're getting paid the millions of dollars at this point in this career, man, they can just play as many games as they can. But man, the NFL, it could be a possibility that it could go into 18 games if the way it's leaning towards, because like you said, it's all about the money, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And well, it should be 20. Let's be honest. There shouldn't be any preseason games. They should do some scrimmages. And that's what eventually it's going to be. In real short time, it's going to be 18. And if they want to, they'll move it to 20. Preseason games are unnecessary. You can practice for just as long. You can do what you can do. Just watch the games. How bad is the tackling and blocking and everything else in the first couple of games of regular season football? That's because they've almost legislated blocking and tackling out of the game for practice, much less for the games. So, why not count them? If you're going to play them, count them. And if you're going to play them and count them, you better pay them.
Yeah, it's like, what's the point of preseason, like you said? It's just, but then again, doesn't it open more opportunities for the backups to actually step in and maybe become a starter?
Rarely. I mean, if you, I don't know, if that happens, you didn't plan very well. And it's always nice to have a pleasant surprise, because that's usually some guy that came out somewhere in the draft or a free agent just shows up and is amazing. Does that mean we'll see less of that? Possibly. Yeah. I would highly doubt it that it's going to be that impactful, though.
So you're all in for possibly 20 games, but no preseason. But scrimmages, that kind of does make it more interesting, just to have more scrimmages instead of preseason, right? It's just more exciting.
You see it anyway, where the various teams come in. And they'll practice against each other for 2 or 3 days, and another team will come in and they'll practice together for a couple of days. That can serve. I mean, the whole idea of preseason is to hit somebody that's not on your team.
Yeah.
And to do things against somebody that doesn't do what you do. So if you can do that, then that's just fine. You don't need all those. But the one thing you do need is to find a way to block and tackle and do all the fundamental things. And I'm I'm not ignorant of the stresses on your body or your head or anything else that's involved in doing that. But the reality is the game suffers when you don't.
Oh yeah, it's just I think scrimmages have more excitement than preseason because you get to see them practice against other teams. It gets kind of boring when you go against your own team. It just I like more of the mix and maybe less of a risk injury because preseason it does cause more risk of injuries for most of the other players. Sometimes your key player can play like some meaningless game, like you said, and they can possibly be injured, and it's pointless.
Yeah, that's the worst thing when you get injuries in the preseason. That's, like I said, there's things you can't sort of plan for, and you never plan for injuries. But getting big injuries in the preseason is just the worst.
It sure is. Like it happens with a lot of these players. But after your football career, you ended up becoming a broadcaster, man. What was the best advice for anybody who wants to do that?
Well, when you're still playing, my best advice is always to get involved. That's what I did. I had my own radio show, and I had my own TV show. And back in the day, the USFL was a thing, and I did off season. I did some games, USFL games as an analyst. There was a great broadcaster by the name of Barry Tompkins from out in the Bay Area, and I got to do a couple years worth of games with him. And that was invaluable for later on getting into the game, the TV game. So it was a point where I had a broadcast reel, whether it was in the studio or games or anything else, that I could keep sending to the networks saying, hey, and if you're a lineman, you probably have to do that a little bit more than the quarterback and the star defensive player because you just don't get the juice or the attention. But that's what I did. I used to send my audition reel every year to the networks and say, hey, when I quit, I'm going to want to do that. And I was able to do it straight out of playing. So I was lucky.
Yeah, you had to think ahead. So during your playing days, man, it had to be a lot fun. Just the fact that you got 3 Super Bowl rings, and was Bill Walsh any bit of a simple coach to work with, or was he kind of a hard head at times?
Yeah, there wasn't much simple about Bill. That's not a word that comes to mind when I think of Bill Walsh. So no, he was a great guy. He was a friend. Then we kind of betrayed that friendship by our 82 season. So he became more of a taskmaster than anything else. But it was almost an unfair advantage the way that he ran that football team and the things that he was doing. And, I didn't really appreciate him quite as much as I did when I was out of the game. And then I was going to all the other organizations around the league on a weekly basis. That opened my eyes to how well run that team was. I mean, that just stunned me that not everyone did things, like Bill Walsh and the Niners did. I mean, it was a definite advantage.
The way he built this offense, the West Coast offense, all this stuff, it's still in today's NFL. And you see a lot of it from Kyle Shanahan running a type of similar system like his dad, but it comes from the Bill Walsh tree.
Yeah, it does. And, now the NFL is kind of a mix of the West Coast offense and the air raid principles. And it's the best description I heard of the current NFL came from a guy that's in his 25th year, Tom Brady.
Oh, yeah.
He said the NFL today is a skills challenge. He goes, it's not the nasty, physical, crazy, rock'em sock'em robots kind of game it was, even when he came in the league, which he's absolutely right. And it is basically, it's always been chess on grass, but now it's really chess on grass. And the linemen are still involved, but they've neutered the game to a degree, and they've made it much safer. And you can't complain about that because it's better for the players.
Player safety in some ways do matter because the concussions and a lot of other stuff have pretty much gotten players to retire a lot early. But Oh man, I like to hear a lot of these Joe Montana stories, man. I'm pretty sure you have some interaction with this guy, and there got to be some funny stories that we're not aware of.
No, Joe was a great guy. Obviously an unbelievable player. Um, early on, really, really good friend when we weren't very good and he wasn't really playing much. But not crazy. I mean, his whole thing about John Candy and the Super Bowl, and the one thing that you have to always understand about guys that play that position that are that good, they talk a lot more shit than you think. Everybody kind of thinks, oh, they're very cerebral, and they're no. It's you'd be surprised. Well, nowadays they mic some of these guys, so you get a little bit more of a taste. But Joe used to love to talk smack.
Oh, so he was a low key talk smacker. Okay, didn't know that.
Oh yeah, big time. No, he'd always pick the most inconvenient guys to talk smack to too. He never challenged the guys that weren't very good. It was always the guys that were really good.
Ah, so he was a good motivator at times, picking on them. So that's definitely a leader for sure. Man, so when we look at the rules of college football, do you think college players should get paid or nah?
Yeah, I think they should. Especially if they plan on expanding this season with an extended playoff. Will they? Until somebody steps up and actually runs college football and controls the money and takes charge of the game. No. I mean, but eventually college, when they're getting paid, that means the players in college were unionized, and there's a collective bargaining agreement to take care of them and take care of their rights. Because without that, they'll never be paid A, very much, or B, anything close to what they're worth. So,
I mean, it kind of does help them financially, but like if you're going to the next level, you'll get your big pay at the next level. But
yeah, well, I mean, for the average guy that's getting a 5-year commitment for an education, yeah, but it isn't always a 5-year commitment. People don't understand. You started a school, that doesn't mean you're going to finish there.
Yeah.
Sometimes they decide that you're not what they wanted. They encourage you to move on to somewhere else. When you see that all the time, and sometimes the players are the ones that transfer. So the transfer rules and whatnot are okay. They've got to figure this thing out before it gets too out of control. But it's been fun to watch.
Maybe in their final year they should get paid because they're going to go for the draft. At least it gives them some little financial.
Yeah, maybe that'll be where they come that third year, third and
they
fourth.
They will want to play for something.
Give them some incentive to hang around for an extra year.
Yeah. Oh, this is the one thing I hate about this NFL lately is the tie games. I just don't like how they just end games with ties. Do you think they need to eliminate those?
I'm not a fan. Not even close to being a fan. I actually kind of like what college does, honestly. Put them on the 25 and let them go at it. Second time, you got to go for 2. You go past the third time, it's just basically you're dueling 2-point conversions. Every time I see a tie, it seems like that tie comes back to haunt a team. It's usually not the ones that got tied. It's usually one of the other teams. I can think of a year, and I can't remember which one it was. It wasn't that long ago. Team finishes 10-5-1. Well, I'm not a math whiz, but if you're 10-6, that record's better than yours. So you actually got an advantage by having a tie on your record. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a fan of the tie. I don't think they're necessary. I think you can settle it on the field. But again, it can always be cloaked as a player safety issue.
Yeah. But like you said, they should try to extend it kind of like the college rule, like you just said it. Like a couple of my buddies were debating about this tie stuff. Like maybe they should change it up to like the way they should do it. like how college football does, it gets pretty interesting. We've seen these overtimes go longer, but like if it goes into like where they kick the ball, if it's still a tie in overtime, they can kick the field goal or whatever until one of them misses, then you're the winner or something like that.
Yeah.
Ask him if he has any crazy football stories in college or the NFL.
None that are public.
Not in public, man, but I guess you're low-key guy. You're low-key. And I know this is probably going to be like the tricky one. I know it sounds tricky if I gave you this one. Who was the better in your opinion, Joe or Steve?
Well, I'm going to tend to go with the guy with all the rings.
Joe Montana.
Yeah. So, I mean, he won 3 while I was there. He won one more right after I left. He won 2 while Steve was still there. Steve was a great quarterback. The Steve Young from 87 through 90, 91, right in there, he was getting better and better, learning the offense and becoming, sort of crafting, what kind of quarterback he was really going to be. So, got to watch a guy like Joe. It's not that hard a question, to be honest with you.
It is not.
just based on results. It is what it is. I mean, he's got 3 rings, so he had a hell of a career too, and he was a Hall of Famer. And he was early on when he first got to the Niners during training camp and on the road. He was my roommate, so I heard about that a few times. So.
Yeah, I heard some of the narrative from Brent Jones talking about being roommates with Steve Young. At first, he didn't enjoy it. He wanted to go with Rathman.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic. Anytime you have that was one of the more challenging things you've seen, for an NFL team.
Well, yeah, it is. And speaking of another good NFL story, well, the guy who was the architect of the Niners was John McVay. Was there like any other like stories of the time you've interacted with him or anything like that? Because I mean, he was a GM at the time, right?
Yeah, he's sort of the unsung hero of those old Niner teams. Bill Walsh had the ideas from the football standpoint, from the organizational standpoint. From the game of football standpoint in the NFL, thinking league wide, somebody had to have the day-to-day nuts and bolts sort of thing down. That was John. John was amazing. We lost a great one when he passed away. He was really something for that team. And, it's not exaggeration to say there wouldn't have been a Niner dynasty without the contributions of John.
Yeah. And he was the one making the moves and working in the front office. So that guy is what you call the unsung hero, did all of the work behind the scenes. And like he has a place in the Niners history. They got like a draft room named after him. So that tells you how important figure he was to the Niners. And then you have an iconic guy like Dwight Clark who makes the catch and all this stuff is rest of his history. But was there any other interaction of Dwight Clark that you had that's kind of a funny story or anything interesting about him?
Yeah, like I said, sure, I got a lot of those stories. I'm not going to tell them, but yeah. Yeah. No, DC and Joe and those early years, you've seen all the pictures of him in those guys in the fur coats and whatnot in Detroit. And it was, they were good. They are good people, or Dwight's case were, but.
Yeah, it sure is, man. And, I mean, there's just a lot of these, like in your early years, you played against some tough teams, right? Like the Steelers, weren't they like the really good dominant team during the 70s?
Yeah, well, they were winning Super Bowls in 78 and 79 when we played them. 78, we opened the season in Pittsburgh on Monday night. That was a harp seal hunt. That was just terrible. We got hammered. It was bad. But yeah, I mean, they were really, really good. And it's what made coming back in 81 and beating them there all the better. Bradshaw was still there. Swan was still there. Stallworth was still there. Lambert was still there. And we came in there and beat them. And that was pretty sweet, and that was a pretty good hint that we were going to be a good team when we could beat them. Because when you talk about dynasties, that's one of the great ones too. That now that time is starting to go a little further and further away from, people sort of forget about.
Yeah, sure does. But doesn't it have more of a nervous experience when you have your first start in the NFL?
My first start was at Green Bay.
Ooh.
At Lambeau Field, 1976. Yeah, it was very, very cool. Because I was a big fan of the NFL playoffs back then, coming into the league then. So I'd seen all the great, Lombardi Packard teams, and I'd seen my hometown team, the Rams and the Niners and the Vikings, and everybody always had to go to Lambeau to beat them to kind of be a legitimate team. So yeah, it was fun getting to start. The first one was, when it all comes down to it, the game is the game. So it wasn't that much different, but it made it that much more special having Lambeau be the first place.
Oh, yeah. It has to stick out as your memory because you played at a legendary Lambeau Field. So, and shout out to Johnny Dell. Who's this Randy Cross? Does he see any of himself on the current O-line? He's just joking.
Yeah. Nah, probably not. Yeah, I mean, I did a little bit. I was an offensive guard and a center. I know I did that Miller Lite commercial, so people remember me as a center because of that. But I was all pro and Pro Bowl and all that at guard, not at center. So it was a good life. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it was, man. You got to be on the commercial, and they just look at – you played pretty much two positions that were important in football, which nobody gets enough recognition at the O-line. That's like the most underappreciated position. So before you played your last game in the NFL, I guess when you retire, was your contract up or you just decided to retire?
I decided to retire. I had enough. I was doing stuff off the field. I knew I had a place for off the field as far as getting into the TV business. So it was time. I was lucky. I was one of the guys that actually was able to say that's it, call off the jam and walk away.
Yeah, if you have nothing to play for, you got 3 Super Bowls. You already accomplished pretty much what you had to do.
I've got a conference call here at 1:00, so we're gonna have to wrap this up.
Okay, so thank you for coming on the show. Maybe down the road.
My pleasure.
Yeah, no problem, man. And yeah, man, the legendary Randy Cross, the 3-time Super Bowl champion, appeared on the show. But we're gonna end this on a high note.
Thank you.
No problem, man. As always, CG Ruthless Sports and Randy Cross is out, and we'll see you guys another time.
Thank you.
No problem, man.
All right.
Have a good one.